Welcome to Spicy Family Scandals, where real-life drama meets hard-earned wisdom. Today's story is about betrayal, resilience, and the power of standing up for yourself. Let's dive in.
I never thought the sound of a wine glass shattering could feel so final. It wasn't just the glass, though. It was the silence that followed, the kind that sucks the air out of the room, making it impossible to breathe. Everyone stared at me, their faces frozen between shock and anticipation, as Carol's voice hung in the air, dripping with venom. "You're just a placeholder, sweetie," she had said, her words cutting through the laughter and chatter. "Jake deserves a real wife, one who can give him what he needs." The way she said it, the way her lips curled into a smug little smirk, made it clear. She wanted this moment to stick. She wanted her words to sink into my bones and make me crumble, right there in front of everyone. But I didn't crumble. Not yet. I stood there, still as a statue, clutching the wine bottle I'd been pouring from just seconds earlier. It had been a pleasant enough evening up until that point, or so I thought. Carol's family had gathered at her sprawling suburban mansion for her 65th birthday, complete with catered food and overpriced champagne. Jake had insisted we go, even though I'd wanted to stay home. Now I knew why. I glanced at him across the table. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open, but he didn't say a word. Not to me. Not to her. And then it hit me. The realization came like a slap to the face, and I almost staggered under its weight. He knew. Not just about tonight, about the dig she'd just made, but about everything. The snide comments, the backhanded insults, the whispered lies. He knew, and he let it happen. The anger bubbled up before I could stop it, hot and sharp and all-consuming. But instead of screaming or storming out, I did something that even surprised me. I smiled. "Carol," I said, my voice calm, almost sweet, "you're absolutely right." Her smirk faltered for just a second, replaced by confusion. "Jake does deserve better." In fact, I set the wine bottle down on the table with a deliberate clink. "Why don't we toast to that?" Before she or anyone else could respond, I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. My heels clicked against the polished hardwood floor, each step echoing louder than the last. But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I walked to the hallway where I'd left my purse and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but not from nerves. It was adrenaline now. A wild, electric rush that made everything seem sharper, clearer. I scrolled through my messages, found the one I was looking for, and hit send. The reply came almost instantly. "Are you sure?" I stared at the screen for a moment, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed 2 words. "Do it." I slipped the phone back into my purse and headed for the bathroom to compose myself. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were hard, her jaw set. She wasn't broken. She wasn't humiliated. She was ready. When I returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted. People were murmuring, stealing nervous glances at me and at Carol, who now looked more annoyed than triumphant. Jake, meanwhile, was avoiding my gaze entirely. I sat back down in my seat, folded my hands neatly in my lap, and smiled again. "Where were we?" I asked, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. The wheels were already in motion, and by the end of the night, this family was going to learn exactly who they were dealing with. The tension in the room was palpable, but I wore my composure like armor. If they thought I was going to cower under Carol's gaze, they didn't know me at all. Carol kept up a routine, flashing her trademark saccharine smile and making small talk as if she hadn't just dragged me through the mud in front of her entire family. But I noticed the flickers of uncertainty in her eyes whenever she glanced my way. Something about my calm demeanor seemed to unsettle her. Good. Jake, on the other hand, looked like he'd rather sink into the floor than meet my gaze. His silence wasn't just cowardice, it was guilt. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat every time someone brought up the inevitable. "So, when will you two be starting a family?" Oh, Carol had been waiting for this moment all evening. "You know," she said, swirling her wine as if this were just another casual dinner topic, "it's such a shame. All these years, and poor Jake hasn't been able to experience the joy of being a father. He'd be such a good one, don't you think?" I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't even look at Jake. Instead, I took a slow sip of my drink, letting her words hang in the air. Funny you should say that, Carol, I said finally, my voice smooth and unbothered. Because I've always thought Jake would make an excellent single father. The room went silent. Jake choked on his water, sputtering as everyone turned to look at him. Carol's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her tone sharp. I didn't answer her. Instead, I let my words linger, soaking in the growing unease around the table. Carol wasn't used to being challenged, and she clearly didn't like the taste of her own medicine. But before she could press further, a knock at the front door shattered the tension. "Are you expecting someone?" Aunt Linda asked, her voice tinged with confusion. Carol frowned, shaking her head as one of the caterers went to answer. Moments later, a man in a dark suit stepped into the dining room, holding a folder under his arm. "Mrs. Harmon?" he asked, his voice calm and professional. Carol stood, visibly annoyed. "Yes? What is this about? We're in the middle of dinner." The man didn't flinch. Instead, he handed her the folder. "You've been served." The gasp that rippled through the room was almost theatrical. Carol froze, staring at the envelope in her hands as if it were a snake about to bite her. "Served? For what?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "I believe the documents will explain everything," the man replied before turning and walking out as quickly as he'd arrived. Carol tore open the envelope, her hands trembling as she scanned the first page. Her face went pale. "What is this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You can't be serious." I leaned back in my chair, my expression as neutral as ever, though my heart was pounding in my chest. I hadn't expected the papers to arrive so soon, but sometimes fate works in your favor. "What's wrong, Carol?" I asked, my tone dripping with mock concern. She glared at me, her eyes blazing. You did this?" I shrugged. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but I did." "Oh, I absolutely did." The folder contained a cease and desist order, along with the first draft of a defamation lawsuit. I'd had my attorney prepare it weeks ago, after Carol's latest stunt had crossed the line. Her constant slander wasn't just cruel, it was damaging, and I wasn't about to let her ruin me without consequences. The room was in chaos now, with everyone talking at once. Jake finally found his voice, turning to me with wide eyes. "What the hell is going on, Emily?" I looked at him, my expression cold. "Ask your mother," I said simply. Carol, for once, was speechless. But the look she gave me promised this wasn't over. And she was right, it wasn't. This was only the beginning. Carol didn't take long to regain her composure. Her lips pursed into a thin line, and she snapped the folder shut with a force that made the table rattle. The room was heavy with tension, the whispers of her stunned relatives filling the air like static. "Emily," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut glass. "You are way out of your league here." I didn't flinch. "Am I?" Jake's voice finally cut through the chaos, shaky and confused. "What's going on? Emily, what did you do?" I turned to him, and for the first time that night, I felt the weight of his betrayal settle on me fully. His silence. His complicity. How many times had he let his mother's words stab into me, pretending he didn't notice? How many times had he defended her instead of me? "What I did," I said slowly, "was finally stand up for myself. Something you should have done a long time ago, Jake." The words hung between us, heavy and accusing. Jake opened his mouth to respond, but Carol, as always, jumped in to take control. "This is ridiculous," she said, waving the folder in the air like it was an annoying fly. "You're trying to intimidate me with this nonsense? Do you really think a court is going to side with you?" "I think the evidence speaks for itself," I replied calmly. Carol's face went red, and I could tell she was struggling to keep up her facade of control. "Evidence? What evidence?" I leaned forward, my gaze locking with hers. "Oh, Carol, do you really think I haven't been paying attention? All those messages you sent Jake, telling him he should leave me? The emails to your friends, spreading lies about me? The recordings of you mocking my infertility to anyone who would listen? I have it all." The color drained from her face, and for the first time, she looked genuinely shaken. "You." "Stop," Jake interrupted, his voice cracking as he stood up from his chair. Emily, this is insane. Why are you doing this here? In front of everyone. I stood too, the anger I'd been holding back for years finally spilling over. Why am I doing this here? Because this is where it started, Jake. Right here, with her constant digs, her manipulation, and your complete refusal to stand up for me. I am done being the quiet, polite wife who lets this family treat me like garbage. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the gears turning in Jake's head as he tried to find a way to salvage the situation, but there was nothing left to salvage. Carol, however, wasn't done. You think you're so clever, don't you? She sneered. You think you've outsmarted me? Well, let me tell you something, sweetie. You'll never win. Jake will never leave his family, no matter how much you try to tear us apart. And then it happened. The moment that changed everything. Maybe he won't have to, came a voice from the doorway. All heads turned as a woman stepped into the room. She was tall, poised, and exuded a confidence that demanded attention. I recognized her instantly. Miranda, the attorney I'd hired to handle the case. But what was she doing here now? Apologies for the interruption, Miranda said, her tone professional but firm. I thought it would be best to address this matter in person. Carol's jaw dropped, and Jake looked like he might faint. What is this? Carol demanded, her voice shrill. Miranda walked over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. Emily asked me to look into a few things, and what I found was illuminating. My heart raced as Miranda turned to address the room. Mrs. Harmon, you've spent years defaming Emily, but that's not the worst of it. Financial records show that you've also been funneling money out of Jake's joint account with Emily to fund your personal expenses. Care to explain that? Carol's face went ashen. That's not true. Jake, tell her that's not true. But Jake didn't say anything. He just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Jake, I prompted, my voice cold. Is it true? He didn't answer. And in that silence, the truth became crystal clear to everyone in the room. The silence in the room stretched unbearably, the weight of Miranda's words pressing down on everyone. Jake's face had turned an unsettling shade of pale, and his silence confirmed what I'd begun to suspect but had hoped wasn't true. Jake, I said again, this time slower, quieter. My voice wasn't angry. It was tired, heavy with the weight of disappointment. Did you know? He finally looked at me, his eyes wide and panicked, and that was all the confirmation I needed. You knew? I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay composed. You knew she was taking our money, and you let her do it? It's not like that. Jake blurted, his voice cracking. I didn't know how to stop her. She said it was temporary, that she'd pay it back. Temporary? Miranda cut in, her tone as sharp as a blade. Mr. Harmon, your mother has siphoned nearly $45,000 from your account over the last 3 years. Temporary doesn't exactly cover it. The collective gasp from the table was deafening. Even Aunt Linda, who had been quietly sipping her wine in the corner, nearly dropped her glass. Carol was the first to recover. She stood, her hands shaking, her face flushed with a mix of fury and humiliation. This is absurd. Jake, are you seriously going to let this woman ruin your family with her lies? Jake looked torn, glancing between his mother and me like a deer caught in the headlights. For a brief moment, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who used to fight for me, who swore we were a team. But that man was gone, replaced by someone too weak to stand up to his overbearing mother, too cowardly to protect the life we'd built together. Jake, I said, my voice breaking, whose side are you on? The question hung in the air, the ultimate ultimatum. I didn't expect him to answer right away. I wasn't even sure I wanted him to. But his silence, his hesitation, was answer enough. Carol seized the opportunity, stepping between us like the puppet master she was. Jake doesn't need to choose, she said, her voice dripping with false confidence. This woman is manipulating him, tearing this family apart. If she cared about him, she'd walk away and stop this circus right now. I let out a bitter laugh, startling everyone. Walk away, I repeated, shaking my head. That's rich, coming from you. You've been trying to push me out of this family since the day I married Jake. But guess what, Carol? I'm not going anywhere. Not until every single person in this room knows exactly who you are and what you've done. Her smug expression faltered, replaced by something darker, something desperate. You don't know who you're messing with, she snapped. I know exactly who I'm messing with, I shot back. A woman so obsessed with control that she's willing to destroy her own son's marriage to get her way. The tension boiled over then, voices erupting around the table. Relatives were whispering, muttering, questioning everything they thought they knew about the woman who had ruled over them for years. Carol tried to regain control, raising her voice to shout over the chaos, but it was too late. Miranda, calm and composed as ever, stepped forward again. I think we've all seen enough tonight. Mrs. Harmon, you'll be hearing from us again very soon. And Jake, she turned to him, her expression softening just slightly. I suggest you think long and hard about where your loyalties lie. Jake didn't respond, his face a mask of shame and uncertainty. I didn't wait for him to make a choice. Instead, I picked up my purse, turned on my heel, and walked toward the door. But before I left, I stopped and glanced over my shoulder. Oh, and Carol? I said, my voice steady and resolute. Enjoy the rest of your evening. It might be your last peaceful one for a while. With that, I walked out, leaving the chaos behind me. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. The cold night air hit my face as I stepped outside, but I barely noticed. My heart was pounding, a mix of adrenaline and anger coursing through me. I didn't stop walking until I reached my car. Once inside, I sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I had expected resistance. I had prepared for Carol's wrath, for Jake's excuses, for the judgmental stares of his relatives. But I hadn't prepared for the emptiness I felt now. A ping from my phone snapped me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Miranda. You did great in there. Call me when you're ready to discuss next steps. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat there, staring at the message, wondering what those next steps would even look like. Was this the beginning of the end for my marriage? Was there even anything left to salvage? As I debated, another notification popped up, this time an email. My stomach churned as I saw the sender. Carol. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The email was short, but its venom was unmistakable. You'll regret this, you ungrateful brat. Jake deserves better, and I'll make sure he gets it. You won't win. I let out a bitter laugh, tossing my phone onto the passenger seat. The audacity of this woman was almost impressive. Almost. For a moment, I thought about driving away, leaving everything behind. But then a thought crept into my mind, one that refused to let go. If Carol wanted a war, she was going to get one. And this time, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting to expose the truth, to make sure everyone saw her for who she really was. But I couldn't do it alone. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Megan. She was Jake's cousin, the only person in his family who had ever stood up for me, who had seen through Carol's facade from the start. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Emily. Megan sounded surprised, maybe even concerned. Are you okay? I took a deep breath. Megan, I need your help. There was a pause on the other end, and then her tone shifted, firm and resolute. What do you need? We talked for nearly an hour, piecing together a plan. Megan knew things Carol had said and done over the years, things she had confided in her closest allies, thinking they would never betray her. But Megan had seen the damage Carol had caused, not just to me but to others in the family, and she was ready to help me put a stop to it. By the time I hung up, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Carol's power came from the secrets she kept, the lies she told, and the fear she instilled in those around her. If I could dismantle that, piece by piece, she would have nothing left. The first step was to gather more evidence. Megan promised to share what she had, but I needed more. Concrete proof of Carol's manipulations and financial misconduct. And I knew just where to find it. I started the car and drove back to the house, my mind racing with possibilities. When I pulled into the driveway, the lights were still on, and I could hear raised voices inside. It seemed the chaos I had left behind was still in full swing. Perfect. I slipped in through the side door, avoiding the main dining room where the shouting match was taking place. Jake's voice was among them, weak and defensive, but I didn't care. My focus was on Carol's study. The room was exactly as I remembered, immaculate, overdecorated, and utterly devoid of warmth. Her desk sat in the center, a shrine to her self-importance. I began opening drawers, careful not to disturb anything that might alert her to my presence. And then I found it, a folder labeled Personal. Inside were bank statements, credit card bills, and emails printed out in neat stacks. As I skimmed through them, my heart raced. There it was, proof of her siphoning money, not just from Jake's account but from a trust fund that was supposed to be for Jake's niece. This wasn't just selfish. It was criminal. I took out my phone and started snapping pictures, my hands trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. If Carol caught me here, I didn't know what she would do. But I couldn't stop now. As I finished, I heard footsteps approaching. My breath caught in my throat as I quickly shoved everything back into place and slipped into the adjoining bathroom, leaving the door cracked just enough to see who was coming. It was Carol. She entered the study, her expression furious, muttering something under her breath. She went straight to the desk, yanking open drawers and rifling through papers. She knew. I held my breath, watching as she pulled out the same folder I had just photographed. She flipped through it, her face twisting into a mask of panic. "I'll handle this," she whispered to herself. "I always handle it." Her words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And as I watched her carefully tuck the folder into her purse and leave the room, I knew one thing for certain. Carol wasn't going to go down without a fight. But neither was I. The drive to Megan's house the next morning felt surreal. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying the events of the previous night on an endless loop. Carol's whispered vow, "I always handle it," echoed in my head like a warning. When I arrived, Megan was already waiting, her expression equal parts nervous and determined. She opened the door and pulled me inside, locking it behind us. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, handing me a steaming cup of coffee. I set the cup down without drinking. "Carol knows. I went through her study last night, and she caught on." Megan's eyes widened. "You didn't." "I took photos of everything I found," I interrupted. "Bank statements, emails, even a trust fund she's been siphoning from." She grabbed the folder afterward, so I'm guessing she's planning her next move. Megan let out a low whistle. "This is worse than I thought. If she's backed into a corner, she'll come out swinging. You need to be ready." "I know," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the pictures. "But we have the upper hand now. This isn't just family drama anymore. What she's doing is illegal." Megan leaned in, scrolling through the photos. "She's going to hate this," she muttered, almost to herself. "If word gets out, her perfect reputation is done for." "That's the plan?" I said, my voice firm. But even as I said it, a part of me hesitated. This wasn't just about exposing Carol, it was about Jake too. Could I really go through with this knowing it would drag him down as well? Megan must have sensed my doubt, because she placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. "Jake had a choice, and he chose to stand by her. This is on him too." Her words settled something in me. I nodded, pushing the guilt aside. "Let's get started," I said. Over the next few hours, Megan and I pieced together a plan. She would use her connections to discreetly circulate the evidence to key members of the family, the ones who still believed Carol walked on water. Meanwhile, I would meet with Miranda to finalize the legal case. But as we worked, my phone buzzed with a text that sent a shiver down my spine. "Unknown number. You think you've won, but you don't know what you've started. Watch your back." I showed Megan the message, and her face darkened. "That has to be Carol. Or someone working for her," I said, my mind racing. "She's never been this direct before." "Because she's scared," Megan pointed out. "And people like Carol are most dangerous when they're scared." We didn't stop working, but the threat lingered in the back of my mind. What would Carol do next? And how far was she willing to go to protect herself? That night, as I sat in my living room sorting through documents, Jake walked in. He looked exhausted, his shirt wrinkled, and his hair a mess. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. I didn't look up. "About what?" how your mother's been stealing from us, or how you've been covering for her. He flinched but pressed on. I didn't know about the money until recently, he said, sitting across from me. I swear, Emily, I didn't know. But you didn't stop her when you found out, I said, my tone cold. You didn't stop her when she humiliated me in front of your entire family. You didn't stop her ever. Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. I didn't know how. She's my mom, Emily. You don't just cut off your own mother. And what am I? I shot back, my voice rising. Am I just someone you can throw under the bus when it's convenient? Someone you can leave to fend for herself while your mother tears me apart? Jake looked at me, and for a moment, I thought he might argue. But then his shoulders slumped, and he sighed. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to choose, I said, standing up and looking him dead in the eye. Her or me, right now. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I saw the war in his eyes, the pull of loyalty to his mother, and the weight of everything we had built together. But when he finally spoke, his answer shattered me. I can't, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I felt the tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. Then we're done, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Jake didn't try to stop me as I walked upstairs and shut the bedroom door behind me. That night, I slept with one thought in my mind. If Jake wouldn't choose, I would. And I was choosing myself. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing relentlessly. At first, I thought it was another one of Carol's veiled threats, but when I checked, it was Megan. You need to see this. Check your email. My stomach tightened as I opened my inbox. The subject line on the forwarded email read, Family Matters. It was a group email, and the list of recipients included nearly every member of Jake's extended family. Megan's message was simple and devastating. She'd attached the evidence. Carol's financial misdeeds, the trust fund theft, her slanderous messages. It was all there, meticulously organized and impossible to deny. Megan's note at the top was direct and without malice. I'm sharing this because we all deserve to know the truth. It's time for us to hold each other accountable and stop letting fear control our family. The fallout was instant. My phone blew up with calls and texts, most of them from Jake's family members expressing shock and disbelief. There were apologies, too, relatives who admitted they'd been wrong to stand by Carol, wrong to stay silent. But what hit hardest was the silence from Jake himself. For hours, I heard nothing from him, until he finally walked through the door, looking like a man defeated. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, his face etched with exhaustion and shame. It's over, he said simply. What's over? I asked, my tone neutral. My mom, he said, running a hand through his hair. She's furious. She's calling everyone, trying to spin the story, but no one's listening anymore. They've seen the proof. They know. And you? I asked, leaning back in my chair. What are you going to do now? Jake looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry, Emily. For everything. I should have stood up for you a long time ago. I let her control me, and I let her hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I'm done with her. Completely. His words hung in the air, and for the first time in years, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with, the man who had promised to be my partner, my equal. But something had shifted in me, something that couldn't be undone. I'm glad you've finally decided to stand up to her, I said quietly. But it's too late for us, Jake. You let her break us, and I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Jake's face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost reached out to comfort him. But I stopped myself. This wasn't about punishing him. It was about protecting myself. I hope you find peace, I said, standing up and walking to the door. But I need to find mine, too. In the weeks that followed, the aftermath was both chaotic and cathartic. Carol's grip on the family dissolved completely as the truth came to light. Several relatives cut ties with her, while others demanded she make restitution for what she'd taken. Her perfect reputation was in ruins. As for Jake, he tried to repair the damage, both with his family and with me. He moved out of the house we'd shared, giving me the space I needed to rebuild my life. We spoke occasionally, but it was clear that our paths were diverging. And then one morning, As I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, my phone buzzed with a message from Megan. You did it. You stood up for yourself. I'm proud of you. I smiled, letting her words sink in. For so long, I'd been defined by what I couldn't have, by the child I couldn't bear, the approval I couldn't win, the marriage I couldn't save. But now I was starting to see myself differently. This wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. I learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, no matter how long you've been standing in someone else's shadow. I learned that true strength isn't about fighting battles. It's about knowing when to walk away. And most importantly, I learned that peace isn't something you find. It's something you make, one hard decision at a time.